Please listen carefully.
Hello, universe. Welcome to the Optimist Daily Update. I'm Summers McKay.
And I'm Kristy Jansen, and we're part of the team behind the Optimist Daily, making solutions the news. We bring you reader-funded solutions news every day in order to change the tenor of news media, social media, and the direction of your day to help make it one focused on solutions.
7 days a week, we publish positive news stories written by award-winning journalists and delivered online to your inbox and through our social channels. And also, we are sharing these solutions in a commute-worthy, walk-worthy, home office-worthy, listen while you cook-worthy podcast. Today is Tuesday, the 11th of May, 2021. Hello, Kristy. How are you?
Good morning, Summers. I'm well, and I have a slight pang because I'm no longer in my home office full-time.
Yes, I guess it should be not just home office worthy, right? It's on your way to the office worthy, commute worthy podcast.
Open, commute worthy.
Yes. Yes, you have had a full week, not just in your home office and instead being in between the two. How did it land?
It was actually wonderful. I really appreciated being back amongst my coworkers, at least having a few days where I was able to interact. We're doing kind of a hybrid, so it's lower numbers. We have a pretty small office anyway of actual in-person team members, but I liked being around people, and I did meet up with a work contact for coffee on Friday, and that was wonderful too. So I feel like I have a bit of a social life again, and I'm really thrilled about that.
That's good. That's good. My house is full. My big kids have relocated from California here, so I've got 3 kids and a husband and 2 cats and a dog. And so this house that previously was just me and the baby most of the time for about a month is bustling likewise with activity. And we, celebrated Mother's Day. I know we talked about that yesterday, but it's been very lovely to have everyone here. We actually went to the Austin Zoo, which is this lovely rescue zoo in the area near where I live. And my daughter got to see her first tiger, and there's like a big white tiger. All of these animals are rescued a lot from private citizens who should not have been keeping these wild animals. But it's just this very lovely zoo. So we had like a hot, humid, outdoor social life weekend, and I feel likewise like I am beginning to be back into society. I also got my second shot yesterday morning, so we are on our way to fully vaccinated in our house as well. Onward and upward. It's just as we roll out here in the United States, we are so fortunate. And Kristy and I were talking about this in our pre-check-in. With the global news and so many of the challenges that happen around the world, the challenges that we have here in the United States it just seems so small compared to what the rest of the world is battling. But that doesn't mean that we can't make a difference in the world that we are in and that we can't make changes in the world that we have an impact in. And Kristy, that's kind of where we are today, is how do we make a change and have an impact? That's where we're having our conversation about today, right?
It is. And we are thrilled that we are going to be bringing on in just a few minutes the subject of our view from this weekend, from the Optimist View, which is our longer form article that gets sent out to our emissary supporting members.
And more often than not posted on you and my LinkedIn, because they're just great articles.
Yeah, they're great articles. But today we're bringing on Anthony Myint, Director of Partnerships at Zero Foodprint, which is working to mobilize the restaurant industry and its allies in the public and private sectors to support healthy soil as a solution to the climate crisis. He's also a chef who won the 2019 Basque Culinary World Prize for his work with Zero Foodprint. And he also won a James Beard Award for Outstanding Restaurateur in 2019, which was, I think, a humanitarian award. And you can correct me on this, Anthony. He's also co-founded several restaurants and restaurant-adjacent projects, including Mission Street Food, Mission Chinese Food, Mission Cantina, Mission Burger, Limited Waffle, Commonwealth, and The Perennial. I think that's your current restaurant project. Anthony, we're thrilled to have you here. We are so supportive of the work you're doing with Zero Foodprint, which is a nonprofit, I believe, and doing some really interesting things to push the food world over into regenerative and really planting those seeds into the soil to shift our food systems into what we need to help to prevent climate change or to mitigate climate change. Welcome, Anthony.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Anthony, it's so exciting to have you on, and I know that the rest of our editorial team has had more opportunity to interview you and talk to you, certainly in preparation for the View they released this past weekend. But this is the first time you and I are talking. Where in the world are you hailing from these days?
I'm based in San Francisco, California.
Excellent. And have you been there a long time? Kind of tell me a little bit about your background and where you've lived over the world and how you found your focus both as a chef and in the world of regenerative agriculture.
I moved here in 2004 from the Washington, D.C. suburbs and kind of started working in kitchens and learning the industry. And things kind of took an improbable turn in 2008 when we started doing pop-up restaurants. And that was before that term even existed, in fact.
I was going to say that was very early in the notion, like that didn't even exist yet, did it?
Yeah, I mean, the term didn't exist. I think journalists started using the term to describe what we were doing. And, we just kept at it and did about 170 events and over the course of a couple of years. And there was a charitable beneficiary for each one. We kind of never thought it would turn into a career path. And, like I said, improbably, it sort of did. That pop-up turned into a permanent pop-up called Mission Chinese Food. And then my friend and I opened a location of Mission Chinese in New York, basically in a kind of rundown Thai takeout window. And miraculously, it won Restaurant of the Year in 2012 in the New York Times. And so we just kind of found ourselves like thrust into this, what at the time was sort of like a really meteoric rise of like celebrity chefs and stuff. And so we'd be at the chef conference, like drinking a beer with the number one chef in the world or kicking a soccer ball around and stuff like that.
Wow. That must have been very, as you said, improbable and very unexpected, but also it gave you like a crash course in just the reality of the celebrity chef culture and all of the access that chefs and restaurants have in really working with people, right? Did that inspire you for that next chapter, or where did you go?
Yeah, I mean, basically that was happening around 2010. And then a couple of years later, my wife and I had a daughter, and we just started to think a lot about climate change and the food system in the future. And we started to realize, first of all, we have a platform, we could start making a difference. But then we also started to realize like the industry has so much cultural capital that it can really create a big influence. And the restaurant industry also, in the US, is something like 1 out of 10 members of the workforce, restaurants and food service, pre-COVID. But so, just really like such a big, big industry, and really nobody was focused on climate solutions.
Interesting. Yeah. Recent headlines, we've covered it on the Optimist Daily, but also New York Times and other major news sources were talking about the Michelin-starred 11 Madison Park and how they're reopening with an all plant-based menu. And so it's sort of interesting that you're tapping into that. And I was curious to know your perspective on the evolution of the role that restaurants and chefs can play in the food sustainability question over this last decade. I guess you've been at this for about that long, a little bit longer even.
Yeah, and so when we began, we started thinking about it along similar lines to how 11 Madison Park is thinking about it. Let's, make better choices. So in 2019, among other things, 2015, we started a restaurant called The Perennial, where we were championing regenerative agriculture and also trying to make those best choices. So we were going crazy. We had like a, super energy efficient hood, and we were trying to, use all the carrot tops and use all the charred stems and really like reduce food waste and conserve and do all these things. And then we started to realize that actually the much bigger impact that we could have was to get to the root of the problem and start changing food production by building healthy soil, which also takes carbon out of the atmosphere.
Why don't you explain at this point Zero Foodprint's mission and how it's designed to help sort of push and pull our food systems towards that regenerative space, which I think you might have to explain regenerative agriculture as well.
Yeah, and maybe it's better to start there because for us, it was also a voyage of discovery. So I think in 2015 or something, we started to learn about regenerative agriculture, and we wanted to start a restaurant championing that and really bringing, this opportunity to the public. And I mean, in principle, regenerative agriculture is farming with nature. It's building healthy soil and growing food that is, delicious, more nutrient dense, and through the growing processes takes carbon out of the atmosphere. At heart, it's almost just like good farming, but basically it stands in contrast to sort of like conventional industrial agriculture, which is often focused on chemistry and is gradually and systematically releasing all the carbon and life in soil and releasing it into the atmosphere. And so regenerative agriculture, among other things, is helping to pull that carbon out of the atmosphere and draw it down and build healthy soil.
How is it different than organic farming?
So there's a lot of overlap. Organic farming, at heart, uses a lot of regenerative principles as well. So some of the main practices would be like applying compost instead of fertilizer, planting cover crops, planting hedgerows and different things, reducing tillage. Organic incorporates those things, but really like what organic certification has come to mean is simply like don't use these certain banned chemicals. You could use these other approved chemicals or, approved additives or whatever. Whereas regenerative farming is more about building soil and more about soil biology, really. And that biology is actually, what's crucial to nutritious and delicious food, but also the biology like represents carbon. So in the same way that with planting trees or something, you plant a seed, sapling, 30 years later, it turns into a huge tree trunk. That tree trunk is a lot of woody biomass that is carbon that has come out of the atmosphere and turned into a tree trunk. And so with forests, like we understand that. And I think society and scientists are just starting to understand the extent of how much carbon can come out of the atmosphere and go into soil as like living soil biology.
Why don't we go into Zero Foodprint's mission now and how you're creating a system that will help to pull our food system towards that regenerative focus on building the soil, and how are you bringing that about with Zero Foodprint?
Sure. So, at the Perennial, we were reducing our footprint, trying to reduce food waste. And then we were also trying to champion regenerative agriculture by, showcasing these farmers and ranchers who were doing incredible climate beneficial farming. And what we started to learn over time is that, we would successfully get a consumer to pay an extra dollar, but that was not actually resulting in a change on acres. And so, as scientists are starting to understand the opportunity through carbon farming, they're almost finding that like a really wide range, because a lot of it is new science, but that there's starting to be consensus that it's a primary climate solution, that the opportunity from changing acres is bigger than changing the energy system, bigger than mass transit and, electrification of vehicles. And I mean, it makes sense in a way because soil carbon, that terrestrial soil carbon pool is like 3 times as much as the atmosphere. So if we just start increasing that incrementally, all that atmospheric carbon can turn into healthy soil carbon. But if you go back to like this one individual restaurant, we started to feel like, we were going crazy, working really hard, making like, freshly baked sourdough bread from perennial grains. And we had a whole animal butchery program from a carbon ranch and all these crazy things. And ultimately, it wasn't changing acres. If one farmer was making an extra dollar, it didn't mean their neighbor was going to start implementing regenerative practices anytime soon. And so in 2019, we closed the restaurant and started working more closely with state agencies in California. And we just recently expanded to Boulder and Denver, Colorado. But the main premise is to make it possible for consumers and restaurants and businesses and really anybody to take local climate action and make eating a climate beneficial act by helping farmers draw down carbon.
And I think you're creating a platform, and also you're helping to fund those farmers and moving towards regenerative practices. Can you explain how Zero Foodprint actually works and what your business model is there?
Yeah, sure. I mean, almost the best way to think about it, I find, is to make an analogy to renewable energy. And so, if you imagine the pace of change in renewable energy, if consumers and citizens would have to take out a loan, climb on the roof, open up the instruction manual, integrate with the local energy company, wait on customer support on hold for 20 minutes, and then be able to connect to the grid. Like very little would happen. But instead,
20 minutes is it's more like 3 hours probably.
Sure. But instead, governments and policymakers and energy advocates are creating systems. Technically, the term is community choice aggregation, but anecdotally, we know that as improving the grid. And so, a citizen can just improve the grid. Maybe they're paying $5 a month on their energy bill, or they're opting in, they're opting out. There's some kind of choice architecture mechanism. And then basically like millions of dollars starts flowing towards this transition. You build a solar farm or wind farm and you're improving the grid. And so I guess the theory of change and the proposition here through these public-private collaborations with regional governments is, well, we need to change a lot of farmland. It's not just like a very small thing, like let's have a few people shop at the farmer's market. millions of acres need to change, billions of acres need to change. And so we need that same sort of choice architecture and collective action. So right now that's taking the shape of some restaurants and businesses opting in to do this. And hopefully in the future that turns into, a couple bucks per month on the trash bill to build composting infrastructure and get compost onto farms and ranches, or different businesses participating like at a really high rate instead of just a few liters.
So you're actually working to update the entire food system, not on a single individual choice, but rather the collective choice that'll go into that.
Yeah, we're trying to make it possible for citizens and businesses to change the production of food and really help farmers change their practices. So the current food system, we could go on forever about it, but in a nutshell, it's almost incentivizing unhealthy soil, if you can believe that. And so there needs to be incentives for healthy soil, but it's the same as that renewable energy situation where in order for a farmer to fundamentally change their practices, they would have huge barriers to adoption. They would have to take out a bunch of loans. They would have to start like direct to consumer marketing and all kinds of things to be able to like charge that extra dollar and gradually recoup and be a great steward of the land. And so the farmer who might want to do that stuff, we're giving them a simple pathway to do it where consumers are, maybe they're paying $10.10 for a sandwich instead of $10. And then we're collecting all that 10 cents and aggregating it and providing grants to farmers who want to implement regenerative practices so that they can afford, 20 tons of compost and to plant cover crops on 20 acres or this kind of thing.
We talk a lot at the Optimist Daily about how solutions aren't siloed and how it's important that policymakers, consumers, and manufacturers are all working in tandem. And what you guys have done is kind of created that runway for a market. What do you think is the projection for Zero Foodprint? Like, how does your business model over time lead to more economically viable decisions for not just the people who are participants in the program, but for other restaurants in general? I mean, obviously there's like a long tail on this one. What are you guys doing to sort of lead to that? And how long do you think it'll take? And what can people do to help accelerate it?
Well, sticking with this renewable energy analogy for a while, like that whole transition is still in process and it's taking many decades.
Yeah.
But the ability for people to improve the grid has really unlocked more rapid change. It gives citizens a way to move faster than government will. And so we're trying to create that same opportunity here. And I think, almost the beginning will probably be waste hauling companies helping cities and counties implement compost infrastructure.
Yes.
And then
so
it'll be
much
getting,
so.
and then it'll branch out from there to like, okay, now we've got the compost in place. Let's start getting that onto local farms and ranches. And then that takes additional funding to, move the trucks and have labor and spreaders and different things. And so I'm wearing a shirt right now that says, keep calm and compost. And that's kind of our, one of our slogans here. But,
right. Yeah.
One of the major learnings early on in our voyage of discovery with regenerative ag is how absolutely critical compost is.
And it touches several different areas. I mean, it's a waste problem, except for it's not waste. I mean, because otherwise that would just go into the landfills. All of that good organic material that could go back into the soil.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost insane to think about it, but like, if you imagine nature everywhere on Earth, every molecule of organic matter is like cycling back into nature.
Right.
Except for the entire food production system of humans. Mm. And we take all that organic matter and we lock it in a plastic bag and bury it and lock it out of nature where it creates toxic fumes, And surprise, surprise, like all of the nutrients in the food are much lower, gradually declining over time. Everyone's getting obese because they have to eat 10 times as much food to get the same nutrients and all these things. And so it's almost like one big biodiesel spill of emissions going into the atmosphere instead of into the soil. And so we need to change that, but it takes funding. Governments want to make progress and do good work on climate and other things. They just don't have the budget.
So strategically speaking, just going back to compost, right? I will fully admit that when we moved here, I was determined that we are going to begin composting, and we are, right? I've got buckets of stuff that eventually will go into my big compost machine that I have yet to actually get around to building because I have a toddler. But one of the biggest things that I noticed when we moved to Texas is that even here in California, you have yard waste recyclables and trash.
In some communities,
in some communities, right?
Some communities.
But in the community that I'm in here in Texas, it's just trash and recyclables. So in addition to food composting, I imagine yard waste probably plays into that as well as being a valuable resource for composting. And it seems like there is a pretty, there's a lot of material available. So are there waste companies that are embarking on compost strategies? Like, who are the heroes beginning to emerge in this industry?
Well, I mean, there's something called the U.S. Composting Council, and they're pushing for community composting and, policy change and different things. But ultimately, it sort of it's almost like the exact same situation as the energy grid, where you have individual, regional governments that need to start finding a way to begin composting.
So it's almost like building the political will, though, too, because I think that's one of the things that you're really embarked upon, Anthony, is just the education. I mean, it was a journey of educating yourself in the beginning, but the way you put that and all of this valuable resource is just going to waste. In fact, it's getting locked out of our regenerative, the way the soil is supposed to work, where it brings that organic material back into itself, and those molecules help to feed the microorganisms, which will then sustain us into the future.
Yeah, exactly. I think so. Zero Foodprint is trying to tackle that on both fronts, both using the cultural capital of, chefs and restaurants and great brands to tell a story of how healthy soil can solve the climate crisis, but also trying to really operationalize it and just get, 1 penny per dollar spent on food to start going towards these kinds of programs, whether it's the compost or whether it's helping farmers plant cover crops and reduce tillage.
A big project.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big opportunity, really. So hopefully we won't be the only ones working on it.
Well, and we talk about, that these solutions have economically viable opportunity, right? That we all know that there has to be a market. Doing good and doing well are not mutually exclusive. And so I think that the work that Zero Foodprint is doing is so important to start really defining the opportunity that I think a lot of people have otherwise assumed wasn't there. Do you have any particular, what is your current hurdle, and what would you want people who are listening to, if they were going to evangelize for you or tell a story for you, what would you want people to be talking about who have just learned about Zero Foodprint? What could they go spread to their communities? How can they be ambassadors for you?
Well, there's so many different ways. So one would be they could just make direct contributions to local carbon farming. So you could just sign up to, send $10 a month to help farmers plant cover crops, supply compost, etc. The other would be they could just let businesses know, let, any local policymakers or other food system advocates know that this movement is beginning. And it's basically a little bit different than the good food movement from the past, 50 years or whatever, because instead of just advocating for making better choices and going farm to table, this is almost saying, hey, the situation and the opportunity is really even bigger than that. We need to go table to farm, and we need to just send a few cents from every purchase economy-wide, like the whole food economy, to start building healthy soil. And so I think part of it is that consumers want sustainable choices. I think I read something in a recent, market research thing saying 70% of consumers are willing to pay 35% more for the sustainable choice, something like that. But in restaurants and in the food system, that sustainable choice in many cases didn't even lead to change on acres. It just was supporting a very small niche. And I think for us, there was kind of a really, crystallizing moment when a soil scientist was telling me a few years ago, you realize the whole organic movement is 2% of farmland after 50 years, right? And I hadn't realized that. I'm in California, there's organic all over the place. You go to Walmart, there's organic kale and whatever. And so this idea that just buying the good stuff once in a while and things will get solved, we started to realize that we needed a whole shift in the food economy. And so I think that will start developing in the next, 5 years, 10 years, this year. But listeners could just help create that movement as quickly as possible.
I love it.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's a really interesting observation, that after all these years of knowing that we ought to do something, there hasn't been a systemic change, partly because one-on-one, it's hard for any of us to make a difference. But if we come together collectively and find, and that's what you're trying to do, is create that collective ability to invest directly in soils. And I think that's, and also you're building the public and private relationships to help pair up the restaurants and the consumers and the farmers and the organizations that are wanting to help them. Anthony, this has been a fascinating conversation. I think we could go for hours, but we do have a limited time. And we always like to end our conversations with solution thinkers like yourself with, what are you tapping into right now that's making you optimistic? And it can be anything from what you're working on with Zero Foodprint to anything beyond that. Just how would you express your optimism right now?
Well, when we were starting to work on regenerative ag in 2015, it sort of felt like you would tell somebody about it and it took 5 minutes to explain or whatever. People didn't even understand farming or healthy soil. Fast forward a few years, regenerative ag is at the center of Biden's climate plan. It's like a buzzword now. And I think that Zero Foodprint is starting to get businesses just reaching out to us and saying like, hey, I want to become part of the climate solution. And we're actually in touch with a few different organizations that are partnering with us to launch kind of affiliate programs in Europe and Asia and different things. So I'm optimistic that the public is starting to, embrace regenerative ag and healthy soil.
And I think that's a tremendous statement, just how quickly it's changed in the last 5 years. And part of it is just that awareness and how it's filtering up into the zeitgeist of the moment, I think. So that's tremendous. Summers, anything else?
Well, no, I'm just so excited. I lived in a very agricultural heavy area when I lived in California, and we would just see over and over and over these fields just like sort of tilled to nothing and then starting from scratch. And over the years that I lived there, to your point, I started to see regenerative ag kind of come, and you'd start to see more agroforestry growing. And it was really, there is optimism because people are learning what it is. And thank you so much, Anthony, for all that you guys are doing to help educate consumers and farmers and restaurants. And also just from a total foodie standpoint, thank you for the amazing food you've brought to the world over the years. It's, food. And I think as our world opens up, and certainly in the United States, we start coming back to restaurants and having that intimate experience of shared table. This is one of those back to better directions that we can all commit to heading. So thank you so much for being on. Kristy, we could just hit up the other headlines on the Optimist Daily today if you want to throw out a couple
and
of them.
There's one I wanted to highlight because we're talking about using discarded citrus peels to create sustainable transparent wood, and the idea that using our food waste and the things which would otherwise be tossed into a plastic bag to sit for eons and not contribute anything back, it's criminal. And so the idea that we're starting to bring this into awareness and figure out how to sort of tap into the circularity of nature. And so there's a headline about just using discarded citrus peels to create sustainable transparent wood. Go look at that on the Optimist Daily today. Other headlines, according to a new study, current COVID-19 vaccines are highly effective against the existing variants. That's good news. Summers for those of us like you and who are now fully vaccinated. Isolation can cause cognitive decline, but socialization can be a cure. I'm finding that going back into my workspace.
I was going to say, it's as if that one was written for us, lady.
Absolutely. What else, Summers?
Let's see. So the EU court upholds pesticide ban to protect European bees and our birds, bees, and bugs. You guys know I'm a fan. How your body tells you you're not drinking enough water. Celebrate and honor your heritage by preserving family recipes. And let's see, there are 3 inspiring women tackling climate change head on. And last but not least, well, actually, there's several more, but there is a way to, IBM develops the world's smallest and most powerful microchip in our technology section of the Optimist Daily. Hey, everybody, thank you for listening to the Optimist Daily Update. We promise to continue to share positive, solution-based stories with ideas on how you can participate in this changing world and ensure it is changed for the good. We promise to cover current events with accuracy, legitimate sources, and offer you the information needed most to chart new paths for all of us. If you're not yet, please consider becoming an emissary for $5 a month, supporting reader-funded independent journalism. Kristy, how do you want us to all leave the day today?
Well, let's keep the Optimist Daily free for all who need it, supported by those of us who can. Thanks so much for being a part of the solution-changing consciousness that addresses our world's biggest challenges, the problem-solving mindset. Anthony, you're one of those solution makers, those problem-solving people. We love that you're here. Thanks so much for being here. And everybody, we'll be back tomorrow with more solutions.